Friends, Part 5 deals with a lot of history, specifically the events leading up to the mass exodus of Germans in the 1880s. And if you wanted to, you could skip to Part 6 for a continuation of the Engelhaupt story. But for those who are interested in European history, but especially the history of Bavaria, the next 10 minutes or so gives you an idea of what was going on between 1871 and 1880. This is a portrait of the very first king of Bavaria, Maximilian I. His birth name was Joseph. He was the son of a Count, Frederick, so he had no last name. And as mentioned before, he was proclaimed king of Bavaria by his buddy, Emperor Napoleon, in 1806. He was born in Heidelberg, a city not far from Bavaria. It's north of Bavaria. And he was a loyal ally of Napoleon. His motivation seems to have been to keep Bavaria separate from the growing population of Protestants in the north, which he perceived as a threat to the cultural heritage of the predominantly Catholics in the south. His eldest daughter married Napoleon's best friend, which cemented his relationship to the French. And as in battle, his political motivation was always to maintain independence for Bavaria. It was Maximilian who had to approve the reassignment of surnames, so he's partly to blame for the creation of new last names in Bavaria while Napoleon was in power. This portrait is his son, Ludwig. In French, that would be the same as Louis. And he became king when Maximilian died in 1825. He remained king of Bavaria until the revolts of 1848, when he stepped down. While Napoleon was still in power in that region between 1806 and 1813, that important 7-year period, he was a crown prince and heavily involved in the persecution of the Napoleonic Wars. When he became king, he took a leading role in the industrialization of Bavaria. He wanted to make it one of the most technological advanced countries in Europe, which is not surprising because there are a lot of good engineers in Bavaria, partly owing to the systems of waters and waterways and rivers. For example, the Black Forest of southern Germany and Bavaria was full of water-powered factories. He was responsible for the construction of a major canal which linked two rivers, the Danube and the River Main, and naturally he called this canal the Ludwig Canal, and it greatly increased commerce in two different parts of Europe. While Ludwig is in power, Abraham Lincoln was a railroad lawyer in Illinois, but he studied what was happening in Bavaria and he greatly admired the innovations that King Ludwig I was making. For example, it was in 1835, under Ludwig's leadership, that the very first railway in Germany was constructed. And it connected the two cities of Fürth and Nuremberg in Bavaria. Here's a photograph from that period of a Bavarian steam locomotive, which was manufactured in Munich by the Bavarian Motor Works Company, BMW. BMW had been around since 1816, and they made their fortune in steam locomotives, producing these kinds of steam engines by the hundreds, if not thousands, which were put in use throughout Europe. Well, there was a revolt in 1848 known as the Beer Revolt, And Ludwig came under increasing pressure from demonstrators, students, but also the middle class were upset over his wasteful spending. And so on March 20th of 1848, he abdicated the throne and placed his eldest son, named Maximilian, in power. This is Ludwig's son, Maximilian II, who was born in 1811, and he became the third king of Bavaria in 1848 after the Beer Revolt. He died in 1864. Unlike his father, King Ludwig was very popular. The people affectionately referred to him as King Max. He was popular because he took a greater interest in good government than in personal extravagance, unlike his father. And when he ascended to the throne, almost immediately a certain stability and good order was restored in Bavaria. And the rest of his leadership was characterized by an attempt to make Bavaria independent from the German North. He resisted German unification, and he wanted to transform Munich into the foremost cultural, industrial, and educational center in competition with Berlin in the north. And in that he was very successful. This is a portrait of the royal family. It was made in the year 1860, 4 years before he died. On the very far left is the Crown Prince Ludwig, his wife Teresa, King Max himself, and his youngest son, Prince Otto. There's a girl, Charlotte, that's not shown in this photograph. In the year 1864, Maximilian II died, and Ludwig became king, taking the title of Ludwig II. This photograph was made in 1864, the year that he became king. For those who are keeping track at home, there have been only 4 kings of Bavaria, all in the 19th century. Maximilian I, appointed by Napoleon in 1806, and then came his son, Ludwig I. After Ludwig's death, Maximilian II became king, and after him, Ludwig II. This is the royal portrait of Ludwig II in his coronation uniform. He was coronated in 1865, a year after he became king. And this photograph is of Ludwig and his sister Charlotte 2 years later. Well, although he was initially very popular and the people genuinely loved him for some purposes, but he too was criticized, like his grandfather, for his extravagant ways. This painting shows him with the famous composer Richard Wagner at the piano. Ludwig was a great admirer of Wagner and built this opera house in Munich exclusively for Wagner's purpose, so he could premiere his operas in this house, in this fantastic opera house. One of Wagner's most famous operas is Ride of the Valkyrie, made popular by the movie Apocalypse Now. For those who aren't familiar, here's a sample of what that sounded like. Well, Wagner's operas could go on for 4 hours. That's just a 30-second segment of his most popular piece. This is a photograph of Wagner in Paris, uh, probably performing that same opera, which was very popular in his lifetime. Wagner was not from Bavaria. He was born in Leipzig, which is kind of central Germany, but he spent most of his productive life in Bavaria. He met King Ludwig in 1865, the year of his coronation, and these two men became lifelong friends. Wagner was not just a composer, he was theater director, he was the conductor of the orchestra, and he didn't call his compositions operas, he referred to them as music dramas. He wrote both the libretto and the music for every one of his music dramas. And he revolutionized opera through his synthesis of the poetic, the visual, musical, and dramatic arts. Mostly, he became the forefather of the Broadway musical. This is an illustration from the opera cover of his famous opera, The Ride of the Valkyries. With the combination of King Ludwig's money and Wagner's creative genius, this was perfectly suited to the Bavarian soul. Bavarians are known for their storytelling ability, their love of music, their flamboyant style and a flair for the dramatic, and for being long-winded. Photograph of Ludwig in 1866, when Wagner wrote about him, "Alas, he is so handsome and wise, soulful and lovely, that I fear that his life must melt away in this vulgar world, like a fleeting dream of the gods." Men don't talk about other men like that anymore, but that was conventional for his day. Ludwig lightly was the savior of Wagner's career. Without Ludwig's inspiration, Wagner's later operas probably never would have been composed. This photograph was taken in 1882 when Ludwig's mental health was deteriorating. By that year, he was known as Mad King Ludwig. Not to his face, but behind his back, the people all wondered if he hadn't lost his mind. Modern psychiatrists speculate that he was suffering from schizophrenia. In 1884, he went into seclusion. Ludwig went into seclusion. He was rarely seen in public, and just about every month there were new rumors about his death. He had a personal physician who would constantly reassure the public and the press that no, the king was still alive and in good health. Part of Ludwig's lasting legacy was this castle that he built, Neuschwanstein Castle at Schwangau. It was uncommon to build structures like this. This is something you might find in the medieval ages, but not in the 19th century, not in 1884. And this kind of extravagance is partly what reinforced Bavaria's reputation as the land of fairy tales. The brothers Grimm, first named Jacob and Wilhelm, were born in Hesse-Kassel, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire. These two men were academics. They collected and published folklore, much of it from Bavaria, such as these stories: Cinderella, the Frog Prince, Hansel and Gretel, Little Red Riding Hood, Rumpelstiltskin, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White. And if you look closer, you can probably see Rapunzel sticking her head out the window of one of these towers, trying to escape. Well, the brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, studied in a city called Marburg, and then they later taught at Marburg. It was something between a college and a university, a small town university. This is where Marburg, Germany is located. Bavaria is not far from Marburg. And if we zoom in closer on Bavaria, you can see that Melrichstadt, where our great grandfather and our grandfather was born, is not that far from Marburg. It's quite possible that travelers between Germany and Bavaria would stop at an inn on their way and listen to these fairy tales that became famous by the Grimm brothers' collections. We'll conclude part 5 with images of Bavaria with its alpine lakes, clear blue water, clean fresh air, invigorating. Lakes that had just a mirror finish to them, unpolluted and pristine. Another castle, this one built in outside of Nuremberg. It had 7 spires, and this is where Ludwig and the royal family would reside when court was not in session in Munich. This area is the border between Bavaria and Austria. Austria is in the distance. And you can see how this is such a fairy tale land. You would wonder, why would anybody ever want to leave there? Finally, a country inn, a typical Bavarian country inn, probably between Bavaria and Austria. And as soon as you enter, you will see an 18th century wooden angel head placed above the